Mark, I'm an alcoholic again. And thank you, Austri, for asking me to speak. And it's cool to speak at this meeting because I love that introduction about the history of this particular group. Really love that introduction, and when you guys talk about thinking about the still suffering alcoholic. So appreciate that. So I never know quite where to start these things, but I can tell you I did not actually plan on being an alcoholic, but I knew early on it was coming. I grew up in a really bad alcoholic family. Now I guess I didn't really by a very early age, a couple things started to happen to me. Number one, I developed this very strong sense that my life was different. What occurred in my house did not occur in other homes. My childhood was different. I just had that sense really early on. And the other thing that I developed was this fear, this little fear of alcohol, right? And I think it started because my dad would occasionally drive really drunk, and it was very scary as a little kid, you know. And my mom would be screaming at him, and he would be driving, and it's just a lot of fear for a kid, you know. So I remember that like really young, and we lived in Southern California. Down by the border, fairly near the border, Escondido, San Marcos, Ramona area, if anyone's familiar. And we had 10 acres, right? And my dad, he's very well educated. My dad, by the way, was Naval Academy graduate submarine skipper. Okay, so not a man to be, but somehow we ended up in Ramona, California, and he's growing kiwis, right? And I'm like, yeah, never quite. It was sort of embarrassing to my mom, you know, that here's this great commander in the Navy, and he's growing kiwis in Southern California. She never liked that, you know. And I remember, man, late at night he'd be out there, and we'd bale this hay. We had 10 acres, and all this hay would get baled, and my dad would be out there, and he'd hire all these Hispanic guys to do it, right? My dad's out there drinking beer on the big combine with my mom was, oh my God, I hope the neighbors don't. This is absurd, you know. They're out there with a big bonfire, you know. Anyway, so what happened is I just knew I'd hear fights at night. I hear pretty loud fights. And then one day about 11, and my dad kind of stopped coming home all the time. And he drove a Porsche, you know, and all this. And he was president of community college and all this. And he grew a beard, and I thought, ooh, shit, something's wrong here. And he was having an affair, right? And so about 11 years old, my dad comes home and said, there's some news that I have to tell everyone. And I was 11, and he sat my brother and I down, and he said, look, your mom and I are going to get a divorce. And he said, I know that's sad news, but there's good news. You know, we're going to go out to dinner. And I thought, thank God. But in my head, in my little 11-year-old head, I understood exactly what the next thing was. I went, and there was a big cry. My mom was crying literally on her knees, begging my dad, please don't leave, please don't leave. And I knew that this was a time when so I went to the cabinet and I got his early times bourbon. And I poured myself this big plastic green, I could still see it in my head. And I filled that thing about halfway full. And halfway was too much for me. And I drank it, but intuitively I knew this is going to change the way I look at this. This is going to make this disaster okay. Now, I talked about that fear of alcohol. And my little 11-year-old head knew there's 4 of us sitting here. There's my brother, my dad, me, and my mom. Not all 4 are coming out. You know, it's like one of those NASCAR races where 3 go into the curve, and you know, not everybody's coming out, right? So I knew this was going down, man. So I took this whiskey and a bourbon, and I drank it, and got very ill, threw up in the car, threw up everywhere. And my mom is screaming at my dad, look what you've done. He's an alcoholic. And I didn't know she was right. I mean, I was only 11, but, So early on, I had to, and all I can say is, my dad used to have these big parties. And in the morning, I would kind of get up, and it was California, right? So everything was outside, hot. And I knew that if I got up early enough, there would be a cooler out there. And in that cooler would be beers still floating around, right? Hams. And so I thought, man, so I'd get up a little early while they were still sleeping. And I was clever enough to go out there and get a few hams. And I'd just walk around that 10 acres drinking, I'd just put them in my pot, just walk around, And anyway, so I knew early on that alcohol I thought it affected everybody like that. I didn't know any better. It looked like it affected but it brought me a sense of relief that nothing else did. And I'm 11, 12, kind of figuring this out. Hey man, when things get rough, I have this little thing I can do, right? And so the divorce happened. We moved to, my mom took off for Jacksonville, Florida, which for some of you guys, that's not very near San Diego. So this was I logged a lot of miles, a lot of frequent flyer miles early on. And my mom fell completely off the hinges. She went bizarro. And she literally, she never could recover from that divorce. And she just started drinking. And just another quick story about the effect of alcohol. She would lock us out of the house a lot. It was Florida. It was fairly warm. It wasn't the end of the world. But, I mean, we'd be walking around the neighborhood all night. And so the neighbors would call CPS, and eventually CPS took action. And anyway, we got taken away from my mom. But one time she brought this guy, Bob, home. And Bob had a felt purple, I'll never forget it, purple felt jacket on with like one of those cowboy hats, the kind of flat top with the little buckle around the top. And Bob had this kind of long, stringy, greasy red hair. And he did cocaine. Now I'm about 13 and I'm in Florida, and he railed out. I thought, God, that's kind of like that, and he'd just rail it right out on the kitchen table, $100 bill. And I'm 13. I'm like, hey, this is pretty good. But Bob had a tendency to beat the living hell out of my mom. And one day he beat her. So he threw her into a toilet, and it cracked a rib. And I'll never forget her on the ground, just, kind of crying and couldn't breathe and everything. And so it was right before New Year's, I think, when that happened. So New Year's came around. And Bob said, well, why don't you have a drink, for Christ's sakes, loosen up a little bit. Because I tried to fight him when he did this to my mom. Of course, that didn't work out too good for me. But, I'll remember New Year's Eve, right? He said, why don't you be a man, kind of man up a little bit, stop whining about everything and have a drink. And he nearly killed my mom 2 days ago. I mean, and I thought, God. So, but the drink sounded pretty good. So I did have the drink, several. I drank champagne. And I was probably 13, 14, somewhere in there. And all of a sudden, I never knew this at the time, but all of a sudden Bob was okay again. Bob, it took away that hatred that I had for that man. And then I thought, maybe I could get some cocaine or something out of this guy. Maybe Bob ain't so bad after all, right? And I'll just say this, I've seen a lot of people, been around a lot of people that drink, and still am, and it doesn't do that. Alcohol just doesn't have that power for everyone to make them literally change their perception of what's happening. And yet here I was 14, 15, and I knew that it did it for me, and so there, Florida, And eventually, we got extricated back to my dad's in San Diego. And so we went back there, and here I kind of had I developed a little meth problem at that point. And that lasted for about 2 years, and I nearly died from that stuff. But when the time came, I was able to quit. I said, no more. I'm dying. My face looks like it's been run over by a snow tire, picking everything. And my little bones were hanging out. It's hard to believe now, but I was very skinny. And
you're doing a good job.
Thank you. And face looks pretty good, huh? And so when it was time for that, I could quit that. And so that's my experience, right? And I could not do that with alcohol. And by the time high school rolled around, it's not. I'm the guy that's at the keg a little bit early and stays a little bit late. I'm hiding beer all over the woods. And my dad, by the way, because of that meth situation, we ended up moving to Shelton. He figured, I'll show them, right? I'll put them in the middle of the woods. We'll see how they do about that. Guess what? Shelton has trouble too, and I found it, right? I mean, I was in, and I got, Justin, you said MIP. I mean, my dad used to get calls. Mark's been drinking, and he's like, it's 10 a.m., and I was drunk in class a little bit, geometry, so take the edge off, right? And so, so I had a little bit of that, but the heat was on me. My dad, I was coming home drunk a lot, and occasionally it was in his car. He didn't appreciate that. And he had about a 2-year sober streak. And it happened to be then. It happened to be right before I was about 18. So he was white knuckle sober, and I'm just kind of finding my groove here, right? Now I have a girlfriend. I have a girlfriend. I had this big Chrysler New Yorker, giant, massive thing. And I had a girlfriend, and so finally he said to me, look, I don't know what you're going to do, but you're not going to do it here anymore. And I was 17. He outlined my options for me. He said, somehow, you think McDonald's, you could work at McDonald's, but you think that's below you. Don't know why. He said, you can do construction or logging, but that's really hard work. I've never seen you predisposed to any kind of hard work. He said, you could go to college, which is something I've mentioned a lot, but he said, that requires commitment and discipline, and I most certainly have not seen either of those things from you. And he said, the only other thing I think of is you might want to consider the Navy and or this military. And so with 90 days to go in my dad's house, I decided that was the best. I'd love to tell you I joined the Navy because I'm so virtuous and that's kind of it. But I really did it because I was running out of options. And so into the Navy I went, and I quickly realized everybody drinks. It's all good. I'm right where I belong. But the problem was those guys would stop. They would stop on Sunday, and the drinking during the week was fairly minimal. I mean, compared to me. And it was when I was 18 that I realized I no longer have a choice. This in the book, this has become a necessity. It's not an option for me anymore. And I got a little bit scared, but not much. Like Justin was talking about, the consequences certainly weren't bad enough to outweigh the benefits. And so I barely made it through I did have to stand in front of the skipper several times. And I remember one time I got thrown in the Huscow in Tijuana, and I almost missed the ship going out of San Diego. And yeah, I spent a couple of days, so I come back, I'm unshaven, I'm wearing my flip-flops, a tank top. I'm beat to hell. The jail guys in Tijuana beat the hell out of me. And when I went home, I was exhausted. I read right all the way back in handcuffs. I went to see the skipper, and he was not impressed with what he saw. And he said to me, "Do you think you have an alcohol problem?" I said, "No, sir." And he said, "Well, guess what? I do." So he prescribed for me some classes. So I went to the classes, and he explained he had airplanes to take care of, a squadron of pilots and young sailors, and he did not have time to babysit. And those weren't his exact words, but I'm paraphrasing. And so I finally, I got out of the Navy, and I just accumulated consequences. And I don't have time to go through them all here, but there were DUIs. There were so many crashed cars. There were relationships that I lost. I mean, this one girl, I was living with her on Hood Canal, and I got out of the Navy, and she couldn't stand me after 1 year. She said, "You got to go." So I said, "Okay, I'm taking my barbecue." So I had to, she said, she's already got another boyfriend, right? So I said, I made my stand, right? I'm not going to stand by and do nothing. So I said, "I'm taking my barbecue." It was a Weber kettle barbecue. She said, you can have your barbecue. So I loaded the barbecue. It wouldn't fit with the stand, so I threw the whole damn thing in the back, the bowl part in the back of my Chevy Citation, which had the front bumper wired on. And boy, did I show her. I backed out of that driveway, and I really spit the gravel everywhere, and I took off. Well, the ashes really started flying around that car, man. And so I went immediately. Union's a small town. This was in Union out on the Hood Canal. It's a very small town, and it was a very short drive to the tavern. But by the time I got there, man, I was covered in ash and soot and a few tears. And they said, "What the fuck happened to you, man? You look like you've been in a fire." And I said, "No, I got rid of her, And so anyway, they said, "Yeah, you look like you did pretty good there." And I showed her, man. And anyway, so fast forward. I mean, I was 36 years old. I really wanted to not drink anymore. And that was the first time that had ever happened. I went to the doctor, and he said, "You're just not going to make it." And so I really wanted to stop drinking. I just couldn't. So I went to 1906 Grand, and I was kind of committing this sort of involuntary suicide. I knew alcohol was going to kill me, but I just couldn't. I could not do it. And it drove me kind of insane to know you're killing yourself, but you don't want to. It was, so then I thought about shooting myself, and so instead I came to AA, and the first meeting I went to, second meeting I went to, I thought, God, they're great, they're okay. But my third meeting, there was this guy, and he came up to me and he said, "Hey, how about you go to a meeting tomorrow?" And I said, "Well, I've already been to one today. And he said, No. He said, "I'm talking about tomorrow." And I said, "Oh, yeah, tomorrow." And he said, "It's a speakers meeting. You won't have to talk." And I kind of thought, well, I like talking. And so anyway, he said, the speaker is really good. And so I went there, and he was the speaker. It was Larry. So Larry was blind, and he could barely see, and big glasses and tall. And he sat in front of a room in a chair and just told his story. And I certainly identified with the drinking part. No shocker there. But when he started talking about not just getting sober, he said, "If you want to get sober, punch a cop. You'll be sober soon enough." He said it's staying sober. And so that kind of made my heart sink a little bit, because I knew I wasn't going to make it. I just knew sitting there, I'll never be like Larry. I'll never be like any of these guys. I can't stay sober. I mean, I was 3 weeks into this deal. And quite frankly, I wasn't sure what you guys really had to offer. I mean, I saw people laughing and joking, but that wasn't me, man. I had too much going on. I had financial problems. I was always in and out of one legal issue or another. And so I didn't see anything funny. I didn't see anything to laugh about here. And I approached Larry and asked him if he'd be my sponsor. He said, look, I want you to, he said, I don't know. He said, look, have you read the book? I said, no. He said, read it. Read it. Don't call me till you're done. Read the first 164 pages. Let me know if it's something you're willing to do. If you identify with it. If you don't, just don't call. Just come to me. This is cool. And so I called him, and we started going through the steps. And I just remember, he told me to get a red notebook. And I never clear why, but he just wanted to see if I'd follow direction, right? And so I showed up with my red notebook, and next thing I know, we're doing a third step prayer, and I'm on my hands and knees holding hands with Larry in the middle of the living room, and I'm thinking, God. And we did it, and in the doctor's opinion, it talks about a psychic change is necessary for us to stay sober. Those are the things that did it for me. It wasn't me walking around going to 10,000 meetings. Not that there's anything wrong with going to, but it was those actions, and they made me write out a 4-step. And when I was done, he said to me, I said, geez, Larry, this thing's a mess, I said, I got 5 pages. It's all over the place. I got 4.5 columns on this, 2 on this. And he said, look, whatever you wrote here is probably the most important thing you've ever done in your life. And I thought, wow, man. I didn't believe him, but then when I went and did my 5th step, he said, just read it to me. Read to me what's on the paper. I said, well, there's a story behind this one. He said, I don't want to hear no more stories. Just read what's on the page. And so I read the thing to him. And I'll tell you, I felt like I was in the club after that. After I did that 5th step. And amends, I'll just never forget that my home groups heard this story sometimes, but I had this girl that I was kind of, I had a relationship with her for a number of years, and it was not fair to her at all, right? And so I led her to believe all kinds of things, and so I don't know why, but that one was eating me alive, and I said, I got to talk to her. So I went and I talked to Larry first, and so I had to drive all the way to Shelton, and I met her in this Mexican restaurant, and I said, look, I haven't had a drink in 28 days. And she said, yeah, right. I said, no, I'm serious. And she could tell right then her demeanor changed, She said, really? I said, yeah, really, 28 days. And she said, I said, look, I got this guy, Larry, and what he says is, I might drink again. And I have this book too. And it says, if I don't do this, I could drink again. And she immediately starts crying. And she said, I thought for sure you would die. She said, I just thought the next time I'd hear from you, you'd be dead. And I said, so I just need to know how my drinking harmed you. And I said, I'm not supposed to talk. I'm supposed to listen right now. And just the tears started coming out of her eyes. I don't know why she was so moved by this. I mean, this was very nervous for me, but she was just, and she just looked at me and she said, Mark, I'm just happy you're okay. And she walked out of the restaurant. That was it. But I'll tell you what I experienced after that was a psychic change. I mean, I might have cried myself a little bit. And it's little things like that. I could see how it affected her. She didn't have to say a word. I understood, man. So just, and, in terms of the 10th step, I just think that I don't do that thing perfectly, but I'll tell you what it does. It is the step that kind of joins me, because I lived in chaos. I lived in total survival mode. 8 hours, get through work. Couple beers before work. After work, God only knows, but we got to do it again the next day. So the 10th step kind of, it brings me back to a human race that I wasn't really part of. Did I hurt anyone? What did I do? How did I do today? I never asked those questions in 36 years. And the 10th step said, I got to take a personal inventory. I got to figure out, am I doing okay? And if I'm not sure, go ask someone. They'll tell you. My wife reminds me every now and then again how I'm doing. And anyway, I got through these steps, and I just want to say that, I've heard, I just don't know how you can go through them as they're outlined in the book and not have that psychic change. I mean, that was the key for me, and I just wouldn't have known what to do. And Larry told me, look, he said, look, honestly, he said, here's what you got. He said, you're mildly entertaining, but he said, really, you're not going to win husband of the year. I wasn't even married at the time. And he said, you're not going to win any awards, nothing. Sober is the highest level you may ever get in your life right now. How does that strike you? I said, well, I don't know. It doesn't sound, So anyway, he said, the only thing you've got going for you right now is that you have this experience that you've told me about, and you're able to pass it on to another man. He said, that's it, man. That's it. And I thought, oh my God, and he said, and he followed it up by saying, it's don't take that lightly. Larry used to joke a lot. Today actually is the 1-year anniversary of his death. And when he died, he'd gone back to Missouri, and his wife, his sister actually got me on this FaceTime call and had him right there on the hospital bed, and he was not conscious at that point, but I talked to him like 2 days before. And his sister said, can you say something to him? Oh, now he wants me to talk, I think, So I said, all I said was, Larry, look, as long as I'm around, they're going to know about Larry. And then they showed him on the thing, and he was all gaunt and really, really bad. But one thing his sister told me is, we called this number because it was the first one in his phone, and he always talked about you. And I was like, wow, you never would have known it, He didn't seem to impress most of the time. But anyway, so I just want to leave with this. One of the ways that I just, when I try and explain to people what is what about AA, man? What is it? I always say, just go. Like, we had this guy Nels in our home groups. I mean, I looked up to Nels so much, man, and I always say, just go to an AA funeral. Just go, even if you don't know the guy. Go. And I went to Nels's funeral, and I went to his house shortly before he died, and I went to his funeral, and I just never ceased to be amazed. Just when I think I've been to one meeting and they're all in a loop, I go to this funeral, and they had a lot of people speak, and this guy gets up, very nervous, and he introduces himself, and he says, I've been out of prison for 3 years now. And he had his girlfriend and his mom there, and he said, I will never forget sitting in that prison waiting for Tuesday night, because Nels would come. And he said, my whole life has just been prison. It's just been like, I just thought you lived that way. I just thought I just didn't have a way out, And he said, but here would come Tuesday. And on Monday, I'd start thinking about Nels and him coming. And he said, here he'd come. And he said, by God, by the end of Tuesday, I knew I could do another week. I knew I was going to be okay for one more week. And it's because he said, in here and out there, he said, I just never had any hope. And he said, so Nels comes in, bopping in Tuesday nights, and he said, every time he leaves, I have hope. He goes, it seems like if that guy can do it, maybe I can do it. And Nels talks about other guys who have done it. So he just said, I have this life today, and it's all because at that time I didn't have any hope, and Nels brought that hope. And so I don't know. I hardly have been to a funeral of a non-AA member But I just look around and I look at all the lives that have been touched, all the tears, all the people who have been touched by that person. My friend Duke at 1906 Grand was the same way. I mean, I don't know. I'm just truly I'm just so happy to be part of something that affects so many people in so many different ways and brings that hope. So that's it for me. Thank you, guys.